August 19, 1944. Headquarters of the Wehrmacht in East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl looked over the newest intelligence reports from the Western Front, which was falling apart. His staff had worked out the math for Allied supply lines that went from the beaches of Normandy to Patton's, leading the Third Army. The Americans have gotten ahead of their plans. Patton will do. Stop in days, or even hours. No army can keep up speeds that fast without fuel. Jodl looked at what was going on from Hitler's Wolfschanze base. Every German general knew from personal experience. An armored division killed 150,000 gallons of fuel every day when moving forward. The U.S. was now 400 m away from their supply bases. The math had to be done. His Third Army would stop moving, giving the Wehrmacht had time to get back together at the Sun and might stay there until winter. Howdy Jodl. Didn't know that was 125 miles away, 5,958. Trucks were already rolling east in an endless line, their headlights on, going against military rules and bringing 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express was a transportation plan so crazy that it had never been thought of before in German military science. Possible was about to break every rule about how mechanized fighting works. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks, which were said to be immobile, would crash through German lines at the Sun. They would free Paris in a week. They would be at the border with Germany in a month. Top military minds from the Wehrmacht were about to learn about American operations in a way that would change the way they thought about it forever. What they know about modern fighting. 2,000 truck drivers delivered it, 75% of whom were African American, turned a one-way highway into the best defense supply line in the world. History. The German General Staff was sure that the Americans would fail at logistics because they had been in the military for decades. Based on experience and recent findings, the Wehrmacht was the first to use blitzkrieg, changed the way combined arms fighting was done, and knew all too well how dangerous supply lines could be. It had been their own projects, slowed down many times because logistics couldn't keep up with military success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's progress began not because the Soviets were fighting back, but because they were just not able to send supplies to troops over long distances. Trucks from Germany broke down on Russian roads. Still used for 80% of military travel, horse-drawn wagons couldn't match the speed of the Spearhead's Panzer. Differences in railway size meant supplies more than 100 miles from the front. Heinrich, a General de Panzer soldier. From September 1944 on, von Lettwitz would be in charge of 47 Panzer Corps. In July, the Americans faced the same organizational puzzle we did in Russia. Their mechanical edge turns against them. Machines need. They have moved 400 miles in 30 days, getting fuel, ammo, and parts. Tells us what to do next. Paralysis. German intelligence carefully tracked. United States rates of use. A single Sherman tank used 0.5 MP gallon on roads, but it was much worse crossing country. An army division needed 700 tons of. Every day, an armored division needed 1,000 tons, and Patton was in charge of 12 divisions moving forward on a 60-meter front. The math seemed solid, 12,000 tons every day, moved 400 m from the beaches along damaged roads through A. While the Germans were retreating, they destroyed a transportation network that General Major C. Fried. When Westphal, who would be Field Marshal von Rundstedt's chief of staff in September, did the math on August 20th. However, even if the Americans had endless trucks and perfect roads, which they don't, and no, even if there were no mechanical problems, which is impossible, they still couldn't keep Patton's progress going for more than 48 hours. Physical rules can't be broken, not even by American businesses. At 8 p.m. on August 25, 1944, in a French house near Les that had been taken over by the Germans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayers of the Motor Transport Service spoke to a group of soldiers who were not sure about his math. The evidence they gave was clear. Patton's Third Army was running out of supplies faster than any army in history, moving so fast that no one could have planned for it. Traditional ways of supplying, like train transport, scheduled convoys, and depots. Distribution had broken down under the stress. Gentlemen, the heirs said, we're going to build a highway that goes from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines, but only goes one way. Each car will run for 20 hours. 24. No stopping unless you need gas or something comes up. We are going to move 12,500 tons. Minimum every day. The name comes from train slang. A Red Ball freight was a fast package that was more important than everything else. In the same way, the Red Ball Express would work. Top priority, no delays, and no exceptions. These are the exact details. Went against German military policy. There are two one-way roads next to each other. A full truck is going forward, and an empty truck is coming back. 24-hour business. With their headlights on, giving up on blackout rules. No stop rule, just in case of fuel or mechanical breakdown. 5-minute gaps between convoys, keeping speed of 35 miles per hour on average. Every 50 m, there are mobile repair units. Milestones for MPs. Taking away any car going less than 25 miles per hour. Chief of Staff Charles O. Thrasher, in charge of the advanced part of ADSC, the Advanced Communication Zone, looked over the predicted numbers. It's time for 140 truck companies and 5,958 cars at a minimum, with 90% availability. That's not possible in any way. The best management book ever written. But in just 36 hours, the impossible was done. Operational. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 916 Quartermaster Truck Company got into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, loaded with 105mm military shells and known as the Deuce and a Half, firing at Melun, which is 300 miles to the east. The types of people who live in the Red Ball. German racist thinkers would have been shocked by Express. Out of the 23,000 drivers who, about 75% of the people who finally ran the route were African American. Soldiers in an army that is still divided. These guys, who couldn't eat in. In many parts of America, people who eat at or use white restaurants were keeping the most famous white people. Generals' armies are moving. Within hours, the drivers formed their own society. They put up messages on their trucks. Hitler, we're coming to Patton's blood bank. Express from Detroit to Berlin. They made their own rules for driving. Slower cars pulled off right away. Failures of the machinery were pushed into drains. Trucks going less than 20 miles per hour were seen as a roadblock. By August 28, German surveillance units started to report something that had never been seen before. Units from Aufklärung 116 radioed from places that looked out over the main Red Ball route. Keep going. Column of the car. Headlights can be seen 20 kilometers away. Not a space, not a blank. Discipline. Think about 1,000 cars per hour. The Americans have given up on all military safety measure. This went against everything the German military taught. Lights on at night. Asked for an air attack. Continuous columns made great targets for artillery. No, because there was space between the cars, one broken-down truck could stop the whole fleet. But it looked like the Americans. Not worried. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuinger was in charge of the 21st Panzer Division. On August 30th, people watched the Red Ball Express from hidden places. A report sent to Army Group B headquarters showed that fears were growing. The enemy has a delivery system that is bigger than ours. To understand, every 30 seconds, day or night, cars drive by without stopping. They don't hide, spread out, and don't worry about following the rules. We get it. It's not science for the military. It's war creation on a large scale. The Germans didn't get was that American operations worked in a completely different way, where German ideology put the most weight. Americans counted on volume to hide. Where Germans kept their cars, the Americans planned for a 20% chance of mechanical failure. Where the Germans, Americans constantly adapted while the military followed strict rules. The numbers that the Red Ball Express reached went against what the Germans thought was possible in terms of logistics. First, week of August 25th through August 31st, 1944. 89,939. A lot of goods were sent. On average, 12,848 per day. A lot. It's 686 miles round trip. 5,958 trucks make 1.5 runs every day as part of vehicle rotations. Fuel. 300,000 gallons were used by the process itself. These numbers were taken from American papers by German logistics experts, who thought they were just propaganda. But the numbers were real, and they were going up faster. The Red Bull Express was done by September 5th. had set a pace that German transportation officers who still used horse-drawn wagons thought was impossible. For 80% of their going around, every 5 minutes, convoys left from the end in the west. 67 cars on average in a convoy. 5 tons per car. Normal, 7 tons, often overload. It takes 14 hours to go 350 miles one way. Average, 2 hours for each end of the job. Vehicles that are always moving. 5,000 at any time. Every hour, the Red Ball Express led to new ideas. German military science thought that problems that drivers and engineers could not solve could not be solved. When trucks broke down, about 1,800 mobile repair units were sent out every day. Fix things on the side of the road. A triage method was made by mechanics, 15. It only takes minutes to fix or move. Parts were taken from cars that were thought to be beyond repair. Using mobile lifts, the engines were switched out in 45 minutes. As soon as the selected red. When the bull route got crowded, cars found other ways to get around. They took over French cars to get around. To free up trucks for goods and staff, they took German cars and painted them olive drab and putting them to work. Using the rubble from destroyed bridges, they made roads around them. Bombed houses as a road surface. The Germans couldn't understand how this confusion could lead to order. Understand it. The German logistics philosophy stressed careful planning and upkeep. Plans and the right way to do things. The Americans broke all the rules. Still, their system sped up instead of falling apart. The most shocking discovery. American fuel control was what the Germans saw. The Red Ball line. Every day, it used 300,000 gallons of gas just for its own activities. Then a lot of German forces got in any case. But there was always enough power. The U.S. had also built Operation Pluto, which included tunnels under the putting in fuel pipes across the English Channel and the ocean. By September 1944, flowed through lines that were underwater. German intelligence had not even found it. Forward fuel dumps were set up. Every 25 miles along the Red Ball path, there was a separate path for tanker cars. Convoy system, which made sure that no car had to wait more than 10 minutes to get gas. Walt Lement, General Major. Seen from surveillance photos taken from above. The Americans have bigger fuel dumps. As all of our strategic stores put together, they use more gas to move than we give to whole Panzer regions. This isn't war the way we usually think of it. It's overflow in the industry. The Red Ball Express did more than just send plans ahead of time. It made it go faster. A lot of times. According to German military theory, an armored division could hold out for 22-30 miles every day in ideal weather. Patton's forces gave that the Red Ball Express went between 40 and 60 miles every day for weeks. On September 1st, 1944, the 4th Armored Division made 35 miles of progress in the morning. Stopped at noon to get more supplies. Red Ball trucks with fuel and ammunition were ready, and they moved forward 32 miles. In the late afternoon, this 67mm single-day progress broke through the German defenses, planning that assumed progress of no more than 30 meters per day. General Oberst Heinz. When Guderian looked at the stories in East Prussia at first, he didn't believe them. Armored forces can't move 60 miles every day for a week. Mechanical problems are enough to stop it. This is either lies or wrong identification. But American radio chatter that was spied on proved it. Even more upsetting for German commanders, the Americans were broadcasting their views openly and without code. They were very sure that they were able to move faster than the Germans could respond. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had put together detailed reports on the Red Ball. Say it. The consequences were terrible for Vermica's plans. The assumption about the American military strength had to be changed. The report had notes that didn't make sense. German research into war. Americans threw away a huge number of cars, leaving them behind. Trucks were damaged instead of being fixed. Drivers were high on drugs for days, breaking every rule of management of employees. There was no camouflage control, which left the whole system open to air attacks that never happened. It came. 30% of technical failures every day are just too much for redundancy to handle. That much fuel use would bankrupt any European force. What Field Marshal Walter Model said showed growing desperation. If what these stories say is true, we face not a better army, but a better way of life. They don't try to hide because they Do not be afraid of us. There are no limits on the resources they use, so they waste them. Military methods will not work to stop this. The drivers of the Red Ball Express payday. German viewers couldn't see the physical price. Drivers worked for 72 straight hours. Hours while imagining from being tired and taking Benzedrine. 300 drivers died in accidents. In the time that the Red Ball was operating, trucks crashed in the fog and flipped over on injured roads and burned when engines that were too hot caught fire. But confidence stayed high. Incredibly high. These guys, who were mostly African American, were not given equal rights knew they were making history on the way home. With every step, they showed that Hitler's ideas about race were wrong. Every ton was driven and delivered. German officers who were captured gave powerful evidence to the Red Ball Expresses. Change. When Aust Hans von Luck was captured in September 1944, he told his interrogators, when we figured out your supply method, we knew we were out of the game. You break every rule. You've turned war into an industry by wasting fuel, leaving cars unattended, and tiring drivers. Beyond our understanding. The effect on the German troops' minds was terrible. It's true. Every night, soldiers could hear American trucks. Never-ending motors and materials. There were 3 rounds. Americans brought millions of rounds for each gun. The sound itself turned into battle on the mind. The German engineers were amazed by the cars themselves. The GMCC CKW2.5-ton truck. The backbone of the Red Ball Express stood for perfect mass production. By the end of the war, General Motors had made more than 500,000 of these cars. The German military had more trucks of all kinds than anyone else in the world put together. The cars had new features that Germans hadn't made. All-wheel drive the norm instead of the exception. Automatic tire. Systems for air pressure, insulation that let 30 inches of forward movement, and engines that had heaters that actually worked in the winter and ran on bad fuel without being changed. Even more amazing was American way of thinking about upkeep. The Americans changed engines where the Germans rebuilt them. There were rations in Germany. Americans threw away whole cars for small problems instead of just parts. Where the Germans had master mechanics, while the Americans had thousands of skilled mechanics who could do 80% of the fixes themselves. The Red Ball Express went east as the front moved. Changed so quickly that it shocked German planners who were used to having weeks to get ready for big changes in logistics. When the first route to Charleroi wasn't enough, Americans made Red Ball Express editions in just one night. Rouen to Paris on the White Ball Express. Switch from Green Diamond to Cherbourg to Railway. Points. From Bayeux to Brussels, the Red Lion. A BC in Charleroi, Antwerp, and Brussels. Each. Within 48 hours of being thought of, the new route was up and running. It took German staff officers weeks to plan similar doing things. The Americans just put up new marks, gave trucks to the right people, and began to roll. The fact that most of the Red Ball Express drivers were African American caused cognitive conflict for Germans who believed in racism. Nazi ideas said black people were weak and couldn't do, not taking the initiative to do technical jobs. But these drivers were doing such amazing things with operations that the Germans were amazed, not able to match. The African American fighters saw the funny side of things. They knew they did even more because of what the Nazis thought of them. Every mile they drove showed Hitler. Not right. They were using truck keys to fight racism and beat Nazi ideas by doing a better job. Some German prisoners were made to load Red Bull trucks while workers learned about their world. Broken by working with African American sergeants who could figure out weight distributions faster, rather than German experts who spoke English better than German teachers of English, who were fair to inmates despite what the Nazis told them about how black people should act. Germans thought it was impossible to build the infrastructure needed for the Red Ball Express while they were in battle. 40 bridges were built or strengthened, and 15 major fuel stores were set up, established 26 repair stations, and built 8 makeshift cities for drivers. While the surgery was going on, running, Deutsche engineers had destroyed the bridge at Monty in order to stop United States logistics. The Wehrmacht figured that a replacement would take at least 2 weeks. The American engineers made a short bridge in 14 hours, but Red Bull convoys only went 8 m off-road on hurriedly built bypass roads. German engineers were amazed by the way Americans built things. There were no planning talks, or in death. No plans, just action right away. They built faster than the Germans could break things down. Built infrastructure that showed up overnight in French fields. One thing that Red Ball Express did really shocked me. German artillery leaders, rates of ammunition supply that were higher than their best guesses. American artillery groups could fire without limits, which was something that no German unit could do. Since 1942, and have fun. During the September 1944 work to weaken Metz defenses, the XDX's main gun fired 100,000 shots in 24 hours. The Red Ball line delivered every time plus an extra 20%. German weaponry that was protecting Metz was. Each gun could only fire 50 shots a day. There was a huge difference. American guns kept firing for hours, even though German military officers knew that such bombardments needed 50 truckloads of weapons every hour. The Red Ball gave it to them right away. The Red Ball Express used up vehicles at a rate that would have stopped any other force. By the end of September, the rate of mechanical failure was shockingly high. Usually, a car lasts 10,000 miles. 30,000 is normal. Every day, 30% of all cars are due. Every week, 500 engines are changed. 10,000 tires were used every week. Number of cars destroyed or left behind more than 5,000. The work never stopped, though. American production had planned for such losses. Ships came to French ports every week. Hundreds of brand new cars are on board. In just 2 days, new drivers were trained and then thrown into convoys. English. It was found that every week, Americans destroyed more cars than the French had marked. Still, their transport, instead of going down, capacity went up. The Germans thought it was impossible for them to do what they did. Logistics. Faster than what's being used. French people living along the Red Ball path saw so many Americans that were scarce during the years of German rule. The effect on their minds of occupation of populations was rapid and deep. The drivers of the Red Ball Express. Even though it was against the rules, African Americans and others often shared their food with French civilians. At every stop, mums and dads would give the kids candy, cigarettes, and soap. The difference with the German rule was harsh. The Americans freely gave away what the Germans had tightly limited. German spies said that the propaganda had an effect. French people now think Americans are there. Victory was certain. They used the groups of trucks as proof. Strength training along Red Bull lines has grown 400%. The people who agreed to our occupation is now openly fighting against it. Early in September 1944, the Red Ball Express had to deal with its biggest problem. So far, Patton's Third Army had made progress. That even the Red Ball had trouble keeping up supply rates. The round trip was now more than 700 m. The drivers were. Vehicles were falling apart, and German intelligence picked up on the stress. On September 8th, General Dear Panzer Warrior Hasse von Mantoel sent word. American supply lines are beginning to break down. The time between convoys has grown from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. A vehicle. The speed has slowed down. We have a chance now. Adaptability again in the United States. The Germans were shocked. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express got back on track. Set up switching points in the middle, which cut the length of each run to 350 miles. Put in place forward repair bases and driver rotation systems. Doubled the number of cars that were given out. By September 12th, the tons had been delivered. Actually went up. The trend got stronger during the crisis that should have stopped it. Along with the Red Ball Express, the Americans came up with another way to move goods that the Germans thought was impossible. Large-scale air source. The C-47 transport plane started carrying important materials straight to forward units. Each plane is carrying 3 tons. Wehrmacht was set up on September 16, 1944. In one day, observers saw 900 transport planes bring 2,700 tons of goods by air. At its peak, the Luftwaffe could send 300 tons to Stalingrad every day. Thought that was the most work possible. The Americans used transport planes like cars, so they didn't have to worry about fighter escorts. Limits on fuel. They thought they were losing and threw too many numbers at them. This industrial math was too hard for Wehrmacht to handle. The Red Ball Express was run by a captain. Rules that went against the German military order. Decisions were made by junior leaders. For Wehrmacht generals, sergeants were in charge of projects bigger than German. Colonels ran things. German viewers didn't understand this decentralization. American logistics seemed to work without a clear controlling authority. Every tenant who moved out did. Each sergeant should act like a colonel, and each officer should act like a general. There should have been chaos. Instead, they got better at being efficient. The Wehrmacht couldn't deal with strict rules. By October 1944, moving forward, railheads started to make it easier for Red Ball Express to do its job. The surgery, which was meant to last 10 days, went on for 82 days and delivered 412,000 tons of goods, over 122. A million tons. German leaders who are now fighting on their own land thought about what they had seen. In his last report, Field Marshal Model said, "We were not beaten by. Americans mostly used tanks or planes to beat us. American trucks were the winner." It was shown by Red Bull Express that logistics are tactics in today's wars. The change to train transportation was impressive in and of itself. Railway workers in the United States had rebuilt 1,000 m of damaged French train lines while the Red Ball was going. They built a new track more quickly than the Germans destroyed it, often using German rail tools that they had taken. The final Red Ball Express numbers didn't match up with every German estimate of what's possible in terms of logistics. 82 days of business for 112,193 tons of goods sent, 222 million tons of travels, 5,958 cars on average. At its peak, 7,000. 23,000 drivers are hired, 700,000 gallons of fuel are used every day, and 40,000. 15 million meals were carried and tons of ammunition were sent just to Patton. 135,000 tons of hospital supplies. Looking at these people in prison, German officers said they had figured out American arrangements by looking at what had worked in Europe in the past. They had made more of their. I thought that was the American record for best showing by 10 times over. They were wrong. Besides tons, in addition to speed and distance, the Red Ball Express did something much more important. It made Germans lose faith in their own combat strength. Officers in the Wehrmacht who thought Americans were weak and inflexible. Dependents saw those same Americans do amazing things with transportation by working hard and having a lot of goods. German prisoners of war would stand still at the fences of their jail camps and count the Red Ball trucks that came and went. Some people cried. We knew what it meant. Not only could the Americans feed their troops, but they could also waste more than the Germans was able to make. One truck at a time, they saw their universe fall apart. Due to the Red Bull Express, the American troops had to deal with an unexpected racial issue. The success of the operation rested a lot on African-American soldiers who were still kept separate, not given equal treatment, and not allowed to play fighting roles. General Eisenhower went to Red Ball. Actions in September 1944 saw for themselves how contradictory it was. His helper, Captain Harry Butcher, wrote down, "The general stood and watched 20-year-old black drivers for hours on end. These men are winning the war just as surely as any infantry," he said. "We need to think again about a lot of things." The success put pressure on integration that helped end segregation in the military. 3 years later, African-American soldiers had shown in France what they've always known. If they had the right tools and chances, they could beat anyone. The Red Ball was their weapon. They won by a large margin, and German racists had a hard time explaining the inconsistency. SS publications on racial science quit talking about American logistics operations because there wasn't enough proof. Too damaging to admit and too much to deny. German military experts studied Red. After the war, Ball Express did a lot of business. The things they learned changed the way people think about logistics. Global volume beats waste. Mechanical redundancy removes risk. Decentralized execution speeds things up. Standardization increases power. Human endurance has bounds, but they're higher than. General Franz Halder, who used to be head of the German Army's General Staff, wrote, "Back in 1950, the Red Ball Express showed that strategy is determined by logistics, not vice. And vice versa. The Americans knew this. It was too late for us to learn." Among the 23,000 Red Bull drivers, there were many brave stories that Germans couldn't understand from their military point of view. These were verified reports from military sources. Records show that Corporal John L. Houston drove nonstop for 48 hours, bringing taking 3 naps at the wheel while transporting ammo to the 2nd Armored Division at Camera. He kept going afterwards. Other drivers brought Private Booker T. Washington's truck back to life after its brakes caught fire. He was carrying emergency supplies, and instead of leaving them where they were supposed to be, he jumped out of the burning car and drove it 2 miles to a field hospital. The supplies saved his life. Soldiers from both sides were hurt, and these stories were told thousands of times. Germans who were watching learned about American military culture through individual initiative, measured risk-taking, and mission completion was more important than following the rules. Desperately, German troops. In late 1944, they tried to make their own version of the Red Ball Express. During the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Greif included plans to use stolen American trucks to make German supply trucks. The plan failed right away because the German cars couldn't keep up with the lines. American speeds. German workers couldn't fix American gear fast enough. They also ran out of fuel. Basically, Germans couldn't copy the American way of thinking about government spending. Obstany, who was in charge of the operation, said, "We have unlimited resources." 50 American cars were taken. 30 were due in less than a week. The Americans would have switched them out. We tried to fix them. That difference is why we lost. The winter of 1944 to 1945 gave the Red Ball Express its toughest test yet. Rain, snow, and ice that freezes. People on wheels should not have been transported. Wheeled logistics were part of German ideology. Below -10 degrees Celsius, it became impossible. The Red Bull Express kept going, though. Driven. As they kept moving, they put chains on the tires and poured alcohol into the radiators. Speeds. The speed dropped from 35 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour, but the supply of tons continued. Germans who watched. They saw convoys covered in ice going through blizzards that had stopped Panzer divisions. The Americans had built a logistics system that worked no matter the geography, the weather, or what the enemy did. It wasn't beautiful or useful. By German standards, it couldn't be stopped. German operations were taken over in May 1945. Officers had to look at how the Red Ball Express worked for historical reasons. What they came to was, all agreed, and it was terrible for German military pride. General of the Infantry Friedrich Schultz put it all together by saying, "The Red Ball Express represents war we never see." Americans dreamed. They built a temporary society. Thousands of men. There were thousands of vehicles and millions of tons of supplies that were only there to feed. They made armies and then broke them up when they were no longer needed. Over years, we built permanent infrastructure. Days of better temporary systems. The most insightful analysis came from the founder of German armored warfare was General R. Hegderian. We came up with Blitzkrieg, but we never got around its main problem, which was logistics. In America, we solved the problem by having too much industry, which we thought was impossible. The Red Ball Express wasn't a supply line, but the United States a flood of material that sank our ships. The Red Ball Express cost the United about $100 million was lost in 1944 because of destroyed vehicles, fuel used, and roads. Destroyed, and the French are claiming damage. German staff officers are used to. People who deal with scarcity didn't understand the number, but Americans thought it was cheap. Operation made it possible to capture 400,000 German soldiers and free France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Cut the war by about 6 months. Every day of war cost America money. The Red Ball Express made $250 million. It paid for itself in 1 day of shorter service. Conflict. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee was in charge of logistics for the European theater, stated, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be catastrophic losses. In American industrial war, it's acceptable overhead." An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America, with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Bull veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theater. Without it, patents, advance stops, Paris falls weeks later, and German forces successfully established winter defensive lines. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timmets. The Red Bull Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundert, Supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Obus Hanspadel, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Von Rundert's response revealed complete understanding. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total." Behind the statistics were human stories that revealed American character to German observers. Drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refusing relief because their trucks might not make it through. Mechanics working in freezing rain to keep convoys rolling. Teenagers lying about their age to drive trucks. Such stories multiplied throughout the operation created a mythology that demoralized German forces. The Americans were not soft as propaganda claimed. They drove themselves harder than Germans drove horses, but they did it voluntarily, not from fear. This made them more dangerous than German doctrine had understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda more powerful than any planned operation. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited supplies while Germans rationed their last ammunition created despair that undermined combat effectiveness. American psychological warfare units recognized the impact. They began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines when actual convoys weren't present. German units reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating the psychological damage the Red Ball Express had inflicted. In November 1944, with rail lines partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. But its methods had revolutionized military logistics permanently. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful but effective supply became American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. The massive operation, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of installations disappeared in 72 hours. Troops reassigned, vehicles redistributed, routes returned to civilian use. Germans required months to create smaller operations and years to dissolve them. Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many cited the Red Ball Express specifically as demonstrating the hopelessness of continued resistance. General der Panzer Trooper Hasse Montoil stated at his interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kessler, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as testament to American industrial warfare. Total cargo, delivered 412,193 tons. Total distance covered 122 million ton-miles. Trucks employed 5,958 daily, average 7,000 peak. Drivers involved 23,000 total. Operating days 82. Fuel consumed 57 million gallons. Tires worn out 180,000. Vehicles destroyed 5,000 plus. Cost $100 million. German divisions defeated through supply advantage 47. Estimated war days shortened 180. These numbers tell a story that transcended military operations. They represent the moment when warfare changed forever, when industrial capacity became more important than tactical brilliance, when logistics determined strategy rather than serving it. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations, but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle they had driven through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. They were black soldiers, mostly segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war, but they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not support. It is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were silenced by 6,000 trucks delivering 12,500 tons daily across 700 m of liberated France. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent, conserve resources, advance cautiously. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in Allied abundance. The operation's success came not from military genius, but from American characteristics Germans never understood: industrial excess, mechanical aptitude, improvisational skill, and most importantly, the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that in the Wehrmacht would require field marshal approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the primary beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers, mostly segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. That truth stands as the final testament to the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway to victory achieved what German military science declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained tempo beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had laughed at American logistics, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence, that logistics had become strategy. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoed through military history. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers, who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves its place among the great military operations of history, not because it was elegant or efficient, it was neither, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept pattern rolling, kept the Germans retreating, and proved that in modern war, the convoy of trucks matters more than the column of tanks. The highways of France still bear the scars of the Red Ball Express, ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired, roadsides littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of Allied victory. Every day the war shortened saved thousands of lives. The Red Bull Express shortened it by months. In the end, the German generals who laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loudly. Indeed, in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The last word belongs to a German officer whose name is lost to history, quoted by a Red Bull driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the officer said in accented English to his captives, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of warfare, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had made logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth, but by then Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistics operation in military history.